Слава Україні!
Hello everyone and welcome back to the new news. I hope everyone is having a great day. I hope that everyone is excited for Friday tomorrow. It's going to be the weekend once again. I can't believe it's already here, but yeah, I cannot wait to go and actually get to sleep in a little bit. But I hope that you are safe. I hope that your family is safe, and I hope that, of course, your friends are safe, and I hope that you are getting to spend a nice evening or nice morning or wherever you are, nice day with your family. And of course, always check out the video description below. We want to be a continual force for good here on the channel, and so we want to be the links are in the description for humanitarian support for all over the world, as well as, of course, the support for Ukraine itself, which is our special report and has been for a while. But we have both. You can support the war effort and the humanitarian efforts in and around Ukraine. Of course, we have humanitarian efforts for the Horn of Africa, both Ethiopia and Somalia. And we also have it for Southeast Asia because it got hit with a really massive typhoon and it really ruined a lot of people's days there. So please check out those links in the description. Also, if you want to join the community, there's a lot of good stuff that gets posted on there by members of the community before the stream, so you can always stay up to date there with them, and also some great memes and some wonderful photos to brighten up your day as well. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right in because there is a pretty decent amount of information that came out of Ukraine today. And so the first thing we want to start off with is always on kind of an interesting note. We're actually going to start off somewhere in the eastern part of the western part of the country. And that's because it would appear that Ukrainian forces have come up with some very ingenious camouflage techniques. Not quite sure where this is at. We can assume it's in the western part of the country just because I don't think they'd be doing this in an active war zone. I could be mistaken. But let's go ahead and take a look here. I think you guys will enjoy this.
Ну що? Хтось є там, хлопці? Слава Україні!
Героям слава! Наші!
And once again, we have another video from a different angle here.
Откривай!
And so they have this tiny tree here, and they're perfectly hidden in this like little dugout underneath the ground there. Perfect. So very good camouflage tactics there. Pretty sure the Russians would never know that they were there. So very interesting indeed. And it's good to see that Ukrainian forces are continuing to get some good training and improving their tactics and how they're going to be handling the Russian forces. We have seen that Ukrainian forces are in general much better tactically. They're much more proficient with their weapon systems, with their battle tactics, and it's really led to some very key victories. They're making some very good moves to counter Russian forces, and so it's working very much in their favor. And as we move over here towards Kyiv, we have a bunch of different information currently going on. So CNN released drone footage today that they got during the Russian occupation of the areas of like Bucha, and they released this because the Kremlin has claimed that the atrocities in Bucha were committed by Ukrainian forces, and whether they were staged or they were conducted by Ukrainian forces, they rounded up a bunch of civilians and shot them and blamed it on the Russians. Now, CNN, who had this drone footage, has released it, and they have evidence here showing Russian vehicles and everything else. They're in Bucha, and this is before Ukrainian forces got back in there, and it is showing unfortunately those that were killed laying in the streets. You can see it here once again. So if you guys want to check it out, it is on CNN. So go ahead and check that out. As we move further south here, we have some good news coming out. And of course, my personal favorite dog in this war, and I think everyone's favorite dog in this war, is Cartridge, also known as Patron. So today, Cartridge, who is this adorable, absolutely adorable little bomb-sniffing dog, was actually he's gotten some fame now, and he's doing a little bit of a tour today. Today he was at a children's hospital in KYIV, where he was actually teaching children what to do if they ever find like explosives, because something that Ukraine is unfortunately going to have to live with, and that pretty much every country in Europe is living with, is the aftermath of war. World War I and World War II saw a massive amount of munitions being used, and there are parts around the Battle of the Somme where during that battlefield, which is World War I, that's over 100 years ago, they're still so dangerous because there's so much unexploded ordnance there that it's too dangerous for you to go there. The likelihood that you accidentally step on something and it explodes and you're either killed or injured is too high. And this is something that Ukraine as well is going to have to deal with. They already had to deal with it because of World War II for some minor portions because they were under German occupation. But there is now much greater risk just because of the amount of ordnance that's been fired by both sides during this conflict. A lot of artillery, and not all of it is exploded. A lot of it ended up landing in that soft Rasputitsa mud, which doesn't make for something nice and hard to impact that really, crushes that detonator and these explosives and causes it to go off. They just kind of plunk and sink there. So, but here he is, our good boy, doing a good service. How can you not love this face? I don't know how you couldn't love this face. He is absolutely adorable. There is a stamp getting made after him. I could do nothing but report on this dog for the rest of my life if I really wanted to. He's absolutely adorable. There's actually a little photo somewhere out there. We have it on our Discord that I keep going back and looking at, where if you notice on the back of his little thing there on his vest, there's actually a handle because you can just pick him up and carry him like a suitcase. He's just that small, and he's just loving his life. He's just living his best life every time he's getting picked up and carried. We also saw today that UN representatives actually left Kyiv. They actually came in today, and this includes Antonio Gutierrez, who was just in Moscow and talked to Putin about opening humanitarian corridors and getting people out of places like Mariupol. And the UN's really trying to find a reason to really exist right now, because the UN, unfortunately, for as good of a thing as it is and its purpose, when those purposes have failed, they haven't been able to do much. There's been a lot of rhetoric. There's been a lot of other things. They've done a bunch of different emergency summits and kicked Russia out of the UN Human Rights Council, and I think they kicked them out of another council as well. They haven't kicked them out of the Security Council because they're one of the big five. But a lot of things have been called into question. But for all intents and purposes, it's been a lot of, shaking of the fists and a lot of words. But the UN hasn't done a lot of actions. And it's not a lot of actions that the UN can take. And as a result, they're kind of at this identity crisis right now, because everything that they have done for the last 80 plus years since the end of World War II has failed now. And now what do we do that it's failed? And one of the members in the Big Five who's supposed to keep global security is the one invading another country. So that's one of the things, and they're trying to find a humanitarian aspect to that to fit into that role. And the representatives left from Kyiv, they're heading down to Zaporizhia, and they hope to be led into Mariupol and start to organize the evacuation efforts of citizens out of Mariupol and out of the Azovstal. This is something that the Russian Federation agreed to in principle. Specifically, it has been reiterated in principle to do these things. However, if it comes to fruition, is yet to be seen. And we actually have the video of them leaving here today. So obviously, they're trying to do whatever they can. However, while they were in Kyiv today, and especially the Secretary General, this is the head guy of the UN. He was in Kyiv. He's part of this envoy. And Russian missiles actually struck Kyiv today. There were multiple of them. I believe we believe 3 of them have been reported thus far. They're targeting a factory. It's a military complex. It's a military factory reportedly, called the Artem, I believe. And they overshot their targets, and they ended up landing amongst a bunch of civilian structures. 6 people were reportedly hospitalized. And once again, like the UN and the main guy of the UN, who is just talking about we need to continue to do what we can to prevent civilian casualties, and Russia just told him to his face that they'll agree to it in principle, just had a missile land amongst a bunch of civilian infrastructure while he's there. So I don't know how much more of a bad impression you need. But we do have some videos of the strikes.
Ебать, вторая прилетела.
Now on this one, this guy is lucky. This guy is unbelievably lucky. What? See, this car is here in the foreground. This is like a CCTV camera. Watch this car where my cursor is. This guy is unbelievably lucky. Can you imagine just driving just a little bit faster? That's all it would take, just a little bit faster. If he had just not hit that red light. Like, that's wild.
Рядом з заводом Артема попали в житловий будинок. Перший, другий, третій поверх. Знищено стіни. Зараз поки інформація щодо потерпілих встановлюється. Займаються ДСНС, рятувальники.
Now, once again, initial reports have 6 people hospitalized. We have not heard anything regarding deaths. However, we do know that at least one missile did not make it to its target, and that's because apparently its motor may have failed while en route, and it actually landed in Fastiv while en route to Kyiv, and it ended up dropping into the middle of this village in a residential area, and there's some pretty extensive damage there. So, that concern about the missile failing is a very, very big thing. And the reason why is because this is the very same reason that there were concerns over Russian missiles flying over nuclear sites, basically power sites. Those reactors are, they're still active. They have nuclear fuel in them. And if a ballistic missile is to strike them, it is potentially going to cause a catastrophic disaster. And we've seen videos of Russian cruise missiles flying over these nuclear reactors. So it's a huge concern. It's something that the International Atomic Energy Agency is basically taking a look at, and that is currently why there's such big concern, because if it can happen to Festive, it could happen to any of those nuclear power plants as well. The chances are still there. And so with that, we're going to move ahead and go into the main topic of everybody currently, which is that's Battle of the Donbass. And this is something that's been ongoing, and we're starting to see some very interesting developments. Now, reportedly, Ukrainian forces are pushing back in certain areas. Russian forces are making gains. As you can see, there's been some bulges here down by Izium. We haven't seen enough activity to change this, and it is a very fluid situation. Similarly, they are claiming all sorts of things, including Rubizne being completely occupied. Popasna is reportedly occupied right now. We don't have enough information to say that it is or is not, so it's contested. As well as areas within the Donetsk and Luhansk, the very minor changes in the battlescape. But as they are taking areas, they're also losing others. And today, reportedly, Ukrainian forces are pushing back. This is reportedly where they're seeing fighting and what they're saying that they've taken control of. We cannot independently confirm this, but that is... There has been a lot of talk from Ukrainians about, they're pushing back in areas such as KYIV. So we don't know what to the extent. We have changed this slightly to represent pushing out from the city. Originally, we had it much closer to the city itself, just outside. But it would appear that there is significant fighting out at a further distance outside of the city. However, that doesn't mean that the Russians aren't striking back, because today we saw Su-25s flying low and fast, and emphasis on the low. Russian aircraft have to fly extremely low level to avoid anti-aircraft fire. And it's not just them, the Ukrainians are doing it too. In fact, there's a very impressive photo of a MiG-29, a Ukrainian MiG-29 coming in for landing, that has a highway, like an interstate sign, stuck into its air intake. Yeah. But that is... So that's an older photo, but you can go ahead and take a look at that. They are having to fly low and fast. And we see that once again here. So, very low and fast indeed. And as we move further south down here by Izium, we actually see that the Ukrainian forces are fighting back against the Russians. We see that they are currently using the Stunga P, which is originally was meant to be shipped to the Middle East. It's being used by Ukraine now for obvious reasons. They held that there. And it's being used to great effect. This is actually coming from one of the Ukrainian soldiers' YouTube channels. But there's also rumors currently circulating that General Valery I'm going to try and pronounce this, Gerasimov is actually taking charge of the forces in that area because they're seeing some delays in what is going on. Now, what makes this important is Valery Gerasimov is actually in charge of the Russian Federation Armed Forces. Like, this is the guy. He's the first minister of defense for Russia. He is in charge of the Russian Armed Forces. If there is anyone in charge of anybody, it's this guy. And he's personally going to take command of the battlefield here. So, once again, those are rumors. We can't confirm that. What we can confirm, though, is at least one destroyed Russian vehicle. And that's because we have a video of it. So let's take a look.
Разрешение на запуск.
Обратите внимание на Толика. Он спрятался?
Да, да.
Внимание! Господи, спаси нас. Выстрел!
Есть.
Заряжай!
So once again, that's coming out of the area around Izium. And as we move further along this front line here, we can see K-52s are firing over Pervomisk. And the K-52 is firing at that high angle of attack we've talked about. This is because if they get any closer, they put themselves at very high risk of being shot down by things such as man-pads, which are man-portable anti-air launchers. That's what they are. So things like the Stinger and the Starstreak, the Igla, the Strela, all of those are called a man-pad. It's just what they are. And so they do this. They give themselves a much higher angle of attack. And this is less accurate. It's something they train to do, but it is less accurate for them to do, which is why they do volleys of rockets, because instead of doing a precision strike with this, they're going to saturate an area with explosives, much like if they were to do it with a BM-21 Grad rocket launcher, one of those artillery pieces that fires those Katyusha rockets. Very similar principle, just done via helicopter. So let's go ahead and take a look. And so there that is. You can see that it's a very clear high angle of attack. But what they're trying to strike against is not an easy target, and that's because this entire area, the Donbass, the Luhansk and Donetsk areas especially, the so-called republics, those have been, there's been a war going on between separatists and really the Russian Federation and Ukraine since 2014. And that basically developed into two very long sets of trench lines, much like World War I and the Western Front, developed into very long trench lines on both sides of the front lines, and in between that is filled with tons and tons and tons of like landmines and explosives and you name it, it's there. Debris. So that's this region. And we can see that these are not, they've become very ornate because the front lines really haven't shifted since 2014. And so they've really gotten to make these things very complex. Much more simple than just digging a hole in the dirt at this point. So let's go ahead and take a look.
So we're back in Donbass trenches here, and this is the place where the Ukrainian soldiers are sleeping. So we're back.
So it's much like they were talking about. It's very similar to what's going on, or what you would have seen during World War One, and even during parts of World War II. The same kind of ideology, the same kind of principles there. And so it's kind of the way where this war is being fought. That's the kind of thing that we've been talking about, where this front line hasn't shifted this entire war for this very reason. And now they're going to try and do an offensive against they're combat experienced now. They're combat experienced Ukrainian troops. They've been through their baptism by fire. So they're not going to be cutting and running. 2, they're very well dug in. Very well dug in. Which is why for days and days and days, Russia has been saturating bombardments and dropping heavy ordnance that you could stack stack yourself on from head to toe 4 times, and that's how deep the crater is. That's the kind of ordnance they're dropping to clear this area out. And we've seen photos and videos of that before here on the stream. Here, somewhere along this front, we saw Ukrainian artillery very hard at work. They're doing counter battery fire, of course, and they're also striking at Russian targets. Those columns that are currently trying to push their way through, and they're trying to get maneuver around Ukrainian forces and trying to envelop and circle them and destroy them. But we see that Ukrainians are dishing out rockets and artillery just as much as the Russians are. So let's take a look. It's really crazy how much that really lights up the sky, but it's nice to see that they're dishing it out as much as they're taking it. So always nice to see that. As we move further south to Mariupol, the Ukrainian field hospital there in the Azovstal, that was actually videotaped. We didn't show it on the stream because there's some pretty brutal stuff. It's a field hospital. It's not like you're seeing someone after they've received treatment at your local, after having a surgery at your local hospital. No, these guys it's nitty gritty field tradecraft kind of medical treatment. It's what they can do to make sure this guy stays alive. And that was actually hit by Russian forces. They dropped several large explosives, several large bombs apparently, as well as hit it with artillery, and it apparently ended up collapsing, or one of those at least ended up dropping through. The Azovstal is still getting shelled, even though that is something Russia has said that they were going to be restraining a little bit on, because they just needed to wait them out. But they're still pouring heavy amounts of ordnance into this. There is an unknown amount of casualties because of this strike. And to reiterate this, targeting and killing wounded in a war is also a war crime. So it's just like if you were to execute a POW, a prisoner of war. Since they are wounded, since they are severely wounded, they're not walking wounded like a lot of those that are currently still fighting actively are. They're considered walking wounded. These guys, their legs are their legs are torn and maimed, and they can no longer carry a weapon and fight. They are no longer combatants. And so if this was targeted for hitting this location, and not just it happened to be hit, then it is actually a war crime if they targeted the field hospital specifically. So we can see a video coming out of there. And it's not just Ukrainian troops that were in that field hospital either. There's a lot of the civilians are wounded as well and require treatment. So it's civilians and it's Ukrainian soldiers, neither of which are combatants at this point. And also, there is some concern in Mariupol. The city is so it's 95% destroyed. It's essentially been wiped off the face of the earth. For all intents and purposes, Mariupol doesn't exist anymore as a city. That's how much the Russians have bombarded this thing, or in this location. It just doesn't really exist. They'd have to completely rebuild this entire city. And it's the situation for the average person is terrible. If you aren't not just the Azovstal, but the people that are in now the Russian occupied locations, there's no running water, there's no food, there's no electricity, no heating, no anything. There's not, for the most part, there's not even a roof over your head because the buildings are bombed into dust. So right now, there's also nowhere for like waste to go either, or the dead, or any of this. And so what's happening is there could be an endemic here. And the Mariupol City Council is reporting that outbreaks of cholera, dysentery, E. coli, etc. could end up erupting in Mariupol. According to a preliminary estimates, more than 22,000 people have died since March. At least 15,000 elderly people with chronic diseases may die, and a catastrophic shortage of medicine, food, and water is in the blocked city. And that's coming from Ludmila Denisova. So that is very, very concerning, because now that the Russians and the Ukrainian fighting and everything else has utterly destroyed this city, now this, the sickly diseases take their turn. They've been waiting up, I guess, until this point, and now there's a possibility they may start to spread, and it may kill even more people. As we move over here to Melitopol, we talked about yesterday where there are regions in Russia, which from our understanding, we may have broken this first, but there are places in Russia that were talking about how they're going to be taking grain and food stocks from places that are occupied in Ukraine to support their people in Russia. They're literally going to forcefully take these food stocks and grain stocks and everything else, bring them to Russia, and they are going to give them to their people while Ukrainians starve. The similar situation happened in 1932 and 1933 called the Holodomor, which literally means, literally translated means death by hunger. It's Ukrainian, it means death by hunger. And millions of Ukrainians died. Millions of Ukrainians died. Millions in Kharkiv alone died, let alone Kyiv, let alone everywhere else in the country. And this is because of basically man-made events of the Soviet Union, grain collection, that sort of thing. And today we can see the after effects of these because it's been rumored. We've heard it before. We saw the announcement. Today we see it happening in Melitopol. Trucks and trucks and trucks of grain being loaded and taken to Crimea. All of them painted with, of course, the Z. So let's take a look. So I want to point out that he doesn't even reach the front of the convoy before he cuts off that video. So this isn't like a 1 truck or a 2 truck deal, you know, one here and there. No, that is a ton of food. A absolute ton of food that is getting literally taken from Ukraine and just given to Russians. Literally the second Holodomor. That's what's essentially happening here. Because while they may not be starving to death yet, they're still forcing Ukrainian farmers to go and grow fields, grow their crops, whether or not they want to, because they want to take those crops. There's already been talk that other regions in Russia could do this, aside from the one that were reported on. They were already talking to other regional governments about how it's such a great opportunity because we can steal the food from Ukraine and give it to our own people. And this is because Russia is having issues feeding its own people and keeping the stores stocked because of crippling sanctions, which are happening because they invaded this country. They invaded Ukraine. Like, if they stopped the invasion of Ukraine, maybe some of those sanctions could be lifted. Some, I don't think all of them should be, in my personal opinion, but some could be. But they don't. They want to continue going. It's not going to go very well for them. We can already see it didn't in the north. It's not going as according to plan in the south, apparently. And now they're going to take what they can from the areas they have in their control. That doesn't mean the people aren't fighting back. And we can't confirm that this is what happened. But we've heard about partisan activity in the Melitopol region before. And today, a rail bridge was destroyed in the Melitopol region. It's very vital. Russian logistics rely heavily on trains. They have an entire division in their military dedicated to laying rail, maintaining railroads, operating railroad cars and engines and everything they need, laying gauge, 8-gauge train track, the whole 9 yards. Everything that you need to support a military force with railroads, they got it. Very, very 20th century, but that's what they use. And when a bridge is destroyed, it's a big deal, because that means that you can't supply your troops with food, ammunition, fuel, equipment, replacement parts, all of that. And this is one of the things that supposedly the sabotage by Belarusian railway workers is one of the major causes for some of the Russian logistical issues in the northern part of Kyiv. We do know that there's been partisan activity in Melitopol, and this is also a good sign of partisan activity, though we can't confirm that partisans did this. There's a good likelihood there. And there it is. That is not going to be used by any train anytime soon. So, and we've seen the same tactic on strikes conducted near Belgorod in the Russian territory. And here in Kherson, the first thing is that there's a ton of reeds on fire. Not necessarily pertaining to the war. No one knows what the cause is at this point. But there's a bunch of reeds on fire near the city of Kherson. It's not apparently endangering anyone. It's apparently under control. You can just see here. It's just a giant thing of smoke billowing out here. And there's a closer look we're getting ready to take a look at here. But it doesn't appear that this was like a Ukrainian strike or anything. It's just a ton of the dry reeds caught on fire, and now they're burning on the riverside. So, as far as we can tell, it's not something from the war. It's just could endanger more people if it spreads. But we do know that explosions were reportedly heard near Kherson by the residents there. So we do know that strikes are in fact occurring. We saw strikes yesterday. On the radio tower, or the broadcasting tower specifically. It knocked out everybody's TV set. So, as someone in the city put it very bluntly, the Russian propaganda channels are involuntarily off the air. And from our understanding, that has not been fixed. But we also know that Ukrainian troops shot down a Russian helicopter from their area in the front lines. They fired over their lines and actually hit what is reportedly a KA-52 that was near the city of Kherson from their own line. So let's take a look here.
Їбало? Тихо, тихо.
Повтори!
So once again, reportedly they shot down a K-52. I did not see an impact in the video where that missile did make contact, but that is what they're saying occurred, and so we leave it as reportedly. And we know that Ukrainian air defenses are still working. Reportedly, they shot down 3 incoming missiles. This came roughly about the time that the missiles struck Kyiv. And if we take a look here and back out, this is Odessa, that is Festiv, and here's Kyiv where those missiles landed. It's very possible that those could have been shot from the Black Sea, and that Odessa intercepted 3 of them, and additional several made it all the way to Kyiv, were not intercepted and ended up impacting their targets, or attempting to impact their targets, considering they either landed short or just overshot. And here in Sevastopol, which is an occupied part of Ukraine, it's in Crimea, which was annexed, quote unquote, by Russia. It's not internationally recognized. None of this territory of the Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk, Crimea, none of this is actually internationally recognized. Same with Transnistria in Moldova, and that's been a breakaway region that's had Russian troops in it for about 30 years now. So none of it is recognized. They're all recognized as still being part of Ukraine by the international community. Russia's the only one that considers it separate. And in Sevastopol, we see, while Russia's denying their losses, Sevastopol is telling a different story. Not the government officially, but, well, you'll see they're taking losses. This right here is the Sevastopol cemetery. And every single one of those are Russian troops who have been killed in action. So, now, this isn't to say that this is like the crew of the Moskva. We do know that there's some questions as to the legitimacy of their losses or the lack thereof of the sinking of the Moskva, considering the ammunition detonated aboard the ship. A powder magazine detonating is the same thing that sunk the USS Arizona and caused nearly half of the casualties at the Battle of Pearl Harbor. So we know it's a major event, very catastrophic event inside of a ship, inside of that armor plating. And so that information isn't very forthcoming. There may have also been some improper storage techniques aboard the Moskva, to say the least. But we're not going to say that that's the crew. It's likely just losses they've taken in general. Maybe some of the crew. But that actually covers everything inside the country of Ukraine. Now, there is a lot of stuff that is Ukrainian focused and is in the same general category of what's going on here. We're actually going to jump right across the border here in the west over into Transnistria, which is that breakaway region within Moldova. It's been there for, like I said, about 30 years, since really the fall of the Soviet Union. And we can see that Poland and Bulgaria are telling its citizens that they should leave as quickly as possible, essentially leave immediately. And they're not the only ones, because this was quickly followed by the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, France, Germany. there's been a lot of activity and tensions have really ramped up in the same region. And it's following that same kind of a mentality that really led to the war in Ukraine. Russian-backed speakers are currently, being hated on inside of Transnistria and being oppressed by the local government, whatever, or by the government at large. And Russia has sent troops there. They have a task force in Transnistria. Separatists want to be independent. The population as a whole is Russian speaking, so they must support us. And if we're being oppressed, we want to defend them against oppression. And now, after a bunch of explosions and rocket attacks, it seems that there's some violence going on. It's been possible that those are false flags incidents. We can't say one way or the other. But the tensions are rising. They're skyrocketing very quickly. And people are saying, get out of Dodge. And so we can actually take a look at one of these. Take a look here. FCDO, advising against travel there. Same thing here. This is from Canada. So, those are the travel advisories. We do know that they are now put into effect. And over Europe in general, there is a massive amount of aircraft. And I mean a massive amount of military aircraft. Now, of course, NATO is flying a lot more sorties than they were, air patrols. This is because NATO and most of these countries are part of NATO or are NATO partners. They are really bolstering up their defenses. They're really watching, waiting for anything that may come from Russia, because Russia is very unpredictable. And as well as that, there has been a lot of countries who have recently committed a lot of equipment of different types to Ukraine. And so we see a lot of course, cargo aircraft bringing those supplies in. And all of these are flying with their transponders on, because if they don't, right, that could show something. Don't know what it could show, but it could show something to, say, the Russian Federation. Why is this NATO aircraft next to our border and it doesn't have its transponder on? What are they planning to do? Having the transponders on, which is what we see here, why a lot of people are able to use flight radars to track them, is to show, hey, we're openly doing this. You can't just shoot us down, essentially. It'd be a very bad call for Russia to try and do that. And as we go here over into this region, we're going to start off here in Russia and Belgorod. The first thing is that their air defense there kind of works. The Russian air defenses do technically work, but it doesn't seem that they're actually targeting anything according to some of these launches. We don't actually see it impact any kind of target. It just seems to detonate midair. Take a look. So not really doing much good, but the Russians have put in air defenses in the region just because of the amount of strikes Belgorod has taken, and it's a very critical city for them. But they also staged a shoot down today of a Bayraktar TB2. The very great people of the internet have proven that this is not a Bayraktar, and it didn't take very much. Look at the tail fin. They're propping it up there with bricks. That is not a Bayraktar TB2 tail fin. And not only that, but many of these components, if you look at the internal structure of the wing here, that is not the internal structure of the TB2. Take a look here. Yeah, that's all. Yeah, that is all wrong. So, very, very interesting. So, moving on from that, take a look over here in Saratov. And that's because two military helicopters ended up colliding with each other. They had a mid-air collision. 2 people were killed. 1 person was reportedly injured. We do not have a lot of information on this. It's just not very forthcoming. So let's take a look here. Well, that's it. They don't have a lot of news on it. Russia is very, very restrictive on the news it puts out, and that is not painting Russia in a good light, so it didn't come out. But you know what has come out from Russian state media? Nukes. We've seen them talk about this before, and the Russian Federation has been kind of saber rattling. They've threatened and threatened and threatened and threatened and threatened everybody that's not them about supporting Ukraine, and saying that there will be major repercussions and there will be severe and swift implications that has never been seen by the world. And they've done nuclear tests now. They've launched ICBMs, dummy warheads, across their country. They continue to kind of speak these things, and it's to the point that that most of Europe at this point is just kind of like, okay. And it's just kind of, you've said this a million times. You've said this for the last 30 years. We really don't care anymore. Like, just do it. If you're going to do it, stop talking about it and just do it at this point. That's kind of I mean, they're taking it seriously, but I don't think anyone seriously thinks Russia would launch nukes. They could, but they're just kind of talking about it. And now on state media, they've started talking about it like it wouldn't be such a bad thing if we did this. Like, well, we verified the translation with our translator here in-house, but you'll see, just read the subtitles. It's pretty interesting.
Или мы проигрываем на Украине, или начинается Третья мировая. Лично я считаю более реалистичным путь Третьей мировой. Ну, потому что, зная нас, зная нашего руководителя Путина Владимира Владимировича, вот самое невероятное, что в конце концов все это закончится ядерным ударом, мне представляется все же более вероятным, чем вот такое развитие событий. К ужасу моему, с одной стороны, с другой стороны, к пониманию, что, ну что, значит так. Знаешь, меня...
Но мы-то в рай.
Да. Меня...
А они просто сдохнут.
Или мы проиграем.
We'll go to heaven and they'll simply croak. Just casually talking about World War III and nuclear strikes on Russian state-backed media, in which case the topics have to be approved by the government. Very interesting. Very interesting events indeed. And so we travel down into Syria and Africa. And the first thing we have here coming out of the Middle East is the Islamic State attacked and killed 6 people and injured another 4. This is because they attacked a civil council. It was the PKK, which is a Kurdish group. It's part of the SDF to an extent. They're not quite full partners of the SDF, but the resulting attack ended up killing one of the elders at this meeting, and also 5 of their basically security there, and injured an additional 4. We don't know if they ended up killing the militants, but the attack did in fact happen. That was in Deir ez-Zor province, just right down here along the Euphrates River there. And in Mazir-i-Sharif, once again, there is more violence. We see that several explosions ended up rocking a Shiite district of the city. Currently, the reports are that between 9 and 30 people were either killed or wounded. But those sources are very contradictory, and the Taliban themselves are kind of cracking down on reporters within the country. So a lot of information regarding the situations in the country are not very forthcoming unless it's coming from the Taliban. So there is some concern there. No one so far has claimed responsibility. It's going to be one of those things where the Taliban have to address it. It's just the sources right now are very early. The Taliban hasn't really addressed it. And so, but we do have some media coming out of there. Some of the aftermath, of course. You can see some destroyed vehicles there. and very raging fires in this district following the explosions. So, more violence, unfortunately, occurring in Afghanistan today. However, as we move down here into Nigeria, here in the Borno region, the Islamic State once again conducted an attack. This time they attacked a barracks of Nigerian military forces. They killed several Nigerian soldiers. They set fire to an APC. I believe it's an MRAP, but they're calling it an APC. They set it on fire and they fled with weapons and ammunition. We've seen these hit and runs where they're attacking convoys of and police stations, and they're getting weapons and ammo to support their own efforts, and then they conduct this attack, they steal a bunch of stuff, set everything on fire, and leave. We've seen this a couple times now, both in Iraq and Syria, in Nigeria, and Niger, and so we're continuing to see that here. So let's take a look. And that is that MRAP on fire, that is the APC on fire. And also, here is the Islamic State regarding this. So there was the footage of the attack there in Nigeria. And as we jump across the Atlantic here, we actually start off here in South America. And that's because Peru is planning on buying up coca leaf. And this is actually part of the nation's measures to try and limit drug trafficking. Instead of the coca leaf, the growing of coca leaf is actually illegal. And it's because it's the primary ingredient in cocaine. And this region especially is it's the world's largest producers of cocaine, and alongside Colombia and Bolivia. Colombia is known for things like the Medellin cartel, Pablo Escobar, that kind of stuff. So a large amount of, but they're going to be buying up those crops so they can't be turned into cocaine and smuggled. And we're getting this from France 24. Go check them out if you want to go ahead and learn more about kind of how they're planning on combating drug trafficking and the production of cocaine. However, while Peru is attempting to continue to expand their efforts to prevent drug trafficking, the cartels in Mexico are expanding their efforts as well. Mexico is actually losing control of some of its territory to the drug cartels because they're starting to overpower the government forces. Now, we've seen a lot of chaos coming out of Mexico because of drug cartels. It's one of the key things that puts a lot of tension between the United States and Mexico. It's a very, very pressing matter because most of those drugs are actually getting sent to the United States. They're getting smuggled into the United States because the U.S. has a large amount of users, a lot of buyers for them that are willing to pay in U.S. dollars. And it's very good money for the cartels. It's a very, very good market for them. However, Mexico has been constantly fighting this. They've sent in troops. There's been task forces put into for this. But as we can see here, the cartels are starting to win. So, let's take a look.
¡Hola, guachitos pedorros, hijos de su puta madre, verga! ¡Que no la den de verga, putos! ¡Pura gente de la vida de la verga, madre! ¡No que muy guabudos, verga!
Now, something to point out here, I'm going to mute this, is this guy right here. This guy is not your average, this is not the kind of cartel or whatever you're seeing on TV. This guy has a full plate carrier. He's carrying, modern equipment that is probably just as good, if not better, because it's civilian market stuff, than the guys he's currently taking, which are government forces. This is why it's concerning, because this is why they are not able to maintain control. The cartels are getting so large and so powerful, and they're getting so much money that they can basically supply their own small armies. And when I say supply their own small armies, not just here's an AK, a bunch of ammunition, and a vest. Here is plate carriers that can withstand rounds. Here's a helmet. Here is everything you need. Here's radios, explosives, a rifle, ammunition, hand grenades. They have their own small armies. And this is one of the reasons that the situation in Mexico is very, very dangerous. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, the last time I heard, behind Syria, behind Syria, Mexico is actually considered the second deadliest country in the world. And that may be very old news, but at the time, that was what's going on because of the conflict between the government forces and the cartels. Now, out of Washington, D.C., the Lend-Lease Act was approved. That had happened a long time ago, but the updates were approved to it. The Lend-Lease Act is actually Act 1776, signed into law in 1941. And what this does is streamlining the process for giving other countries equipment. You lend it to them and you lease it to them. And why this is important is because this is the first time since World War II that the United States has committed into the Lend-Lease Act. The last time it was sent for the United Kingdom, France, the Soviet Union, who were the Allied powers during the war, to make sure that the United States would ship raw materials, weaponry, equipment over to those countries. In fact, the M3 Lee main battle tank, I really can't hardly call it a tank, but that was part of the Lend-Lease because the Sherman hadn't been produced yet and the Stuart was kind of outdated. So they threw this tank together and sent it over. The UK rejected it, and then the US said, this is what we got. And so they used it, and they took it into North Africa. Now, it's been approved to do that for Ukraine. That was the update. And this is very big because at the same time, the president is is expected to ask Congress for $33 billion to be sent to Ukraine so that way they can buy aid, buy lethal aid products. That is very important because during the Lend-Lease Act during World War II, the cost of what was being sent to those countries, what those countries were paying back to the United States, quote unquote, being paid back to the United States, everything was being sold to the country at a 90% discount. Now think of something like Ukraine buying Abrams tanks at a 90% discount with the $33 billion that the U.S. sent to them. To give you an idea, in 2021, the defense budget of the entire country of Ukraine was $5.9 billion. 6 times as much. So, very interesting. Not only that, but today Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin also stated that the U.S. would replace any S-300 air defense batteries that Russia ended up destroying in Ukraine. And so we have a couple of things coming out of this. First off, this is saying he's expecting to make a statement today, plans for $33 billion in assistance, and including $20 billion in military aid. Of course, we got a bunch of Humvees here. And then, once again, Secretary of Defense, if Russia takes out Ukraine's S-300 air defenses, the U.S. will work with allies to replace them. And finally, the House has adopted H-Res 1065 for Rule S3522, Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act of 2022 by a vote of 220 to 205 in favor. So that is very, very important. It could totally shift the dynamic, potentially, of how Ukraine is getting its equipment from the United States and what it can get, because this allows the United States to and Ukraine to ask the United States to pull things out of the United States reserve stockpiles and not the stuff they captured in Iraq and Afghanistan and wherever else. It's old Soviet stuff. I'm talking NATO equipment, Abrams tanks, those M777 howitzers they've been getting, rounds for all of this stuff, raw materials, oil, fuel, metal or steel, you name it. If they got the money, which at a 90% discount, I hope they would, they can get it. So it could entirely shift the dynamic. Once again, the last time this was done was during World War II, and this kept the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union in the fight. The Soviet Union was able to steamroll Germany during World War II because their logistics were created by U.S. trucks. They weren't producing enough trucks on their own, just like they do now. It was the United States sending trucks to them that really made or break their offensives, because they had the logistics to support it because of that. And finally, we come over here into Norway. And that's because on Kvinesdal, which is in southwestern Norway, they actually found a Viking ship. So it's kind of going back between 500 and 1,000 years. And right now they did a radar survey to detect the impression of the boat. It's about 26 to 30 feet long, or about 8 to 9 meters. There hasn't been any excavation done on the site, but it's probably like a high member of society. Could have been a king or whoever, someone high within their society, a noble within their society, if this was medieval, like England or something. So very cool. We have a couple of photographs that kind of outline what's going on here at the site. And that's kind of where the ship is located, as well as other interesting sites being outlined here on the map. We can take a further look here. That's where this impression of the boat is being spotted. We can see multiple impressions being made in this entire region. So very, very interesting. I hope that at some point they can excavate and they can find more information on it. I find this stuff absolutely fascinating. I love archaeology. I love shipwrecks. I love all of that kind of stuff. I find it very interesting. And we got this from Live Science. So for once, they're giving us something that's not from like outer space. As much as I love outer space and holograms and all that kind of cool stuff, it's nice to see something a little bit different too. And with that, we have covered all of the news in the world that we have today. So I want to give a big thanks to everyone supporting us and being here with us today. I appreciate your support and your continued support on this. I really thank the staff, because I really couldn't do this without them. I just lend the voice. That is it. I put points on the map and I lend the voice. This is being found by community members that are posting stuff on our Discord, and by mainly by our staff team. We have researchers and translators here in-house for Ukrainian and Russian, and people that are looking. We have sources for other places in the world. We're always looking for more, so join us on Discord and send those over to us. But more important than any of that is to check out the description below and check out all of those humanitarian links, all of the links for supporting the war effort in Ukraine, the humanitarian efforts in Ukraine, the surrounding region, Ethiopia, Somalia, Southeast Asia. Because while the war in Ukraine is terrible and we should have a lot of focus on that, that doesn't mean we can leave other places in the world behind. There are millions of people outside of Ukraine and outside of really anything that has to deal with Ukraine that still need our help throughout the world. So if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, I completely understand. It just takes a few seconds of your time. Please give us a like and subscribe. I don't want to beat out, those big high-end gaming YouTubers. I just want to do something good and become large enough that we can bring in a lot of good and do a lot of good in the world. We want to be able to be the news that gives back. And so with that, I hope you'll join us on the Discord and hope you see us tomorrow night. Have a great rest of your evening. I hope you remain safe, that your family and friends remain safe. And hopefully, once again, we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.